Hey, welcome to my channel. Took a long break off. If you've been following me, I was taking some classes, but I'm back now. I kind of thought about some things to make things better. Mainly, I've seen a lot of people don't enjoy reading a lot, and people who want to read but they don't have time to, or they just don't really like to, but they like the idea of reading. So thought of an idea just where I just read the book, and just read it to you, kind of like an e-book to it for you. So the first book we got here is Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, and just gonna pick it up and start reading to you. See how it goes. Alright, so I'm gonna pick up. I already started it a bit, so about halfway through it. Well, not halfway through it, but a little bit into it. So, up to Book 2, Chapter 1. Virtue, then, is twofold, intellectual and moral. Both the coming into being and increase of intellectual virtue result mostly from teaching. Hence it requires experience and time, whereas moral virtue is the result of habit, and so it is that moral virtue got its name, ethike, by a slight alteration of the term habit or ethos. It is also clear, as a result, that none of the moral virtues are present in us by nature, since nothing that exists by nature is habituated to be other than it is. For example, a stone, because it is borne downward by nature, could not be habituated to be borne upward, not even if some habituates it by throwing it upward 10,000 times. Fire, too, could not be borne downward, nor could anything else that is naturally one way be habituated to be another. Neither by nature, therefore, nor contrary to nature are the virtues present. They are instead present in us who are of such a nature as to receive them, and who are completed through habit. Further, in the case of those things present in us by nature, we are first provided with the capacities associated with them, then later on display the activities, something that is in fact clear in the case of sense perceptions. For it is not as a result of seeing many times or hearing many times that we came to have those sense perceptions. Rather it is, conversely, because we have them that we use them, and not because we use them that we have them. But the virtues we come to have by engaging in activities first, as is the case with the arts as well. For as regards those things we must learn how to do. We learn by doing them. For example, by building houses, people become house builders. And by playing the cithara, they become cithara players. So too, then, by doing just things, we become just, moderate things, moderate, and courageous things, courageous. What happens in the cities, too, bears witness to this, for by habituating citizens, lawgivers make them good. And this is the wish of every lawgiver. All who do not do this well are in error, and it is in this respect that a good regime differs from a base regime. Further, as a result of, and on account of the same things, every virtue both comes into being and is destroyed, as is similarly the case also with an art. For it is a result of playing the cithara that both good and bad cithara players arise. And analogously with house builders and all the rest, as a result of building houses well, people will be good house builders, but as a result of doing so badly, they will be bad ones. If this were not the case, there would be no need of a teacher, but everyone would come into being already good or bad. So too in the case of the virtues. By doing things in our interactions with human beings, some of us become just, others unjust. And by doing things in terrifying circumstances, and by being habituated to feel fear or confidence, some of us become courageous, others cowards. The case is similar as regards desires and bouts of anger. Some people become moderate and gentile, others licentious and irascible, the former as a result of conducting themselves in the one way, the later as a result of doing so in the other. And so, in a word, the characteristics come into being as a result of activities akin to them. Hence we must make our activities be of a certain quality, for the characteristics correspond to the differences among the activities. It makes no small difference, then, whether one is habituated in this or that way, straight from childhood, but a very great difference, or rather the whole difference. Chapter 2. Now since the present subject is taken up, not for the sake of contemplation as are others, for we are conducting an examination, not so that we may know what virtue is, but so that we may become good, since otherwise there will be no benefit from it. It is necessary to examine matters pertaining to actions, that is, how one ought to perform them. For these actions have authoritative control over what sorts of characteristics come into being, just as we have said. Now, acting in accord with correct reason is commonly granted. Let it be posted for now. What pertains to it will be spoken of later, both what correct reason is and how it relates to the virtues. But let it be agreed on in advance that every argument concerned with what ought to be done is bound to be stated in outline only and not precisely, just as we said at the beginning as well, that demands made of given arguments should accord with the subject matter in question. Matters of action and those pertaining to what is advantageous have nothing stationary about them, just as matters of health do not either. And since such is the character of the general argument, still less precise is the argument concerned with particulars, for it does not fall under an art or any set of precepts. Instead, those who act ought themselves always to examine what pertains to the opportune moment, when it presents itself, as is the case with both medicine and piloting. Although such is the character of the present argument, one must none the less attempt to be of assistance. This, then, is the first thing that must be completed. Such things as the virtues are naturally destroyed through deficiency and excess, just as we see in the case of strength and health, for one ought to make use of manifest things as witnesses on behalf of what is immanifest. Excessive as well as deficient gymnastic exercises destroy strength, and similarly both drink and food destroy health as they increase or decrease in quantity, whereas the proportionate amounts create, increase, and preserve health. So it is too with moderation, courage, and the other virtues. He who avoids and fears all things and endures nothing becomes a coward, and he who generally fears nothing but advances toward all things becomes reckless. Similarly, he who enjoys every pleasure and abstains from none becomes licentious. But he who avoids every pleasure, as the boorish do, is a sort of insensible person. Moderation and courage are indeed destroyed by excess and deficiency, but they are preserved by the mean. But not only do the coming into being and increase of the virtues, as well as their distraction, occur as a result of the same things, and through the same things, but the activities associated with the virtues, too, will be found in the same things, as are responsible for their coming into being and increase. For this is the case also with other more manifest things. For example, in the case of strength, it comes into being as a result of taking much nourishment and enduring many exertions, and he who is strong would especially be able to do just these things. So too in the case of the virtues, for as a result of abstaining from pleasures, we become moderate, and by so becoming, we are especially able to abstain from them. Similar is the case of courage as well. By being habituated to disdain frightening things and to endure them, we become courageous, and by so becoming, we will be especially able to endure frightening things. Chapter 3. The pleasure or pain that accompanies someone's deeds ought to be taken as a sign of his characteristics. He who abstains from bodily pleasures and enjoys this very abstention is moderate, but he who is vexed in doing so is licentious. He who endures terrifying things and enjoys doing so, or at any rate is not pained by it, is courageous. But he who is pained thereby is a coward. For moral virtue is concerned with pleasures and pains. It is on account of the pleasure involved that we do base things, and it is on account of the pain that we abstain from noble ones. Thus, one must be brought up in a certain way, straight from childhood, as Plato asserts, so as to enjoy as well as to be pained by what one ought, for this is correct education. Further, if the virtues are concerned with actions and passions, and pleasure and pain accompany every passion and every action, then on this account, too, virtue would be concerned with pleasures and pains. Punishments are indicative of this as well, since they arise through these pains. They are a sort of creative treatment, and creative treatments naturally take place through contraries. Further, as we said just recently too, every characteristic of soul shows its nature in relation to and in its concern for the sorts of things by which it naturally becomes worse or better. It is through pleasures and pains that people become base by pursuing and avoiding these, either the pleasures and pains that one ought not to pursue or avoid, or in one ought not, or as one ought not, or inasmuch other such conditions as are defined by reason. Thus, people even define the virtues as certain dispassionate and calm states, though such a definition is not good, for they say simply this much, but not as one ought, as one ought not, when and any other things persisted in addition. Virtue, therefore, has been posted as being such as to produce the best actions in relation to pleasures and pains, and vice as being the contrary. But that virtue and vice are concerned with the same things might become manifest to us also from these considerations, there being three objects of choice and three of avoidance, the noble, the advantageous, and the pleasant, together with their three contraries, the shameful, the harmful, and the painful. In all these the good person is apt to be correct, the bad person to err, but especially as regards pleasure. For pleasure is common to the animals and attendant upon all things done through choice, since both what is noble and what is advantageous appear pleasant. Further, pleasure has been a part of the upbringing for us all, and from us all from infancy. It is difficult to remove this experience, since our life has been so ingrained with it. We also take pleasure and pain as the rule of our actions, some of us to a greater degree, some to a lesser. It is on account of this, then, that one's entire concern necessarily pertains to pleasure and pain. For taking delight and feeling pain make no small contribution to our actions being well or badly done. Further, it is more difficult to battle against pleasure than against spiritedness, as Heraclius asserts, and art and virtue always arise in connection with that which is more difficult. The doing of something well is better than it is more difficult. As a result, and on account of this, the whole matter concerns both virtue and the political art is bound up with pleasures and pains. For he who dwells with these well will be good, but he who does so badly will be bad. Let it be said, then, that virtue concerns pleasures and pains, that it both increases as a result of those actions from which it comes into being, and is destroyed when these are performed in a different manner, and that it becomes active in just those activities as a result of which it is also came into being. Chapter 4. But someone might be perplexed as to what we mean when we say that to become just, people must do just things, or to become moderate, do moderate things. For if they do just and moderate things, they already are just and moderate, just as if they do what concerns letters and music. They are by that fact skilled or artful in letters and in music. Or is this not so even in the case of the arts? For it is possible to do something skillful in letters by chance or on the instructions of another. A person will actually be skilled in letters then when he both does something skillful and does it in a skillful way, and this is what accords with the art of letters that resides within the person himself. Further, what pertains in the arts is not at all similar to what pertains in the virtues. For the excellence in whatever comes into being through the art resides in the artifacts themselves, It is enough, then, for these artifacts to be in a certain state. But whatever deeds arise in accord with the virtues are not done justly or moderately, if they are merely in a certain state, but only if he who does those deeds is in a certain state as well. First, if he acts knowingly. Second, if he acts by choosing, and by choosing the actions in question for their own sake. And third, if he acts while being in a steady and unwavering state. But these criteria are irrelevant when it comes to possessing the arts, except for the knowledge itself involved. But when it comes to the virtues, knowledge has no or little force, whereas the other two criteria amount to not a small part of, but rather the whole of fair criteria, that are in fact met as a result of our doing just and moderate things many times. Matters of action are said to be just and moderate, then when they are comparable in kind to what the just or moderate person would do, and that he who performs these actions is not by that fact alone just and moderate, but only if he also acts as those who are just and moderate act. It is well said, then, that as a result of doing just things, the just person comes into being, and as a result of doing moderate things, the moderate person. Without performing these actions, nobody would become good. Yet most people, or the many, do not do them, and seeking refuge in argument, they suppose that they are philosophizing, and that they will in this way be serious, thereby doing something similar to the sick who listen attentively to the physicians, but do nothing prescribed. Just as these later then will not have a body in good condition by caring for it in this way, so too the former will not have a soul in good condition by philosophizing this way. Chapter 5. After this, what virtue is must be examined. Now since there are three things that are present in the soul, passions, capacities, and characteristics, virtue will be one of these. I mean by passions the following: desire, anger, fear, confidence, envy, joy, friendly affection, hatred, yearning, emulation, pity. In general, those things that pleasure or pain accompany. And capacities are those things in reference to which we are said to be able to undergo these passions. For example, those in reference to which we are able to feel anger, pain, or pity. But characteristics are those things in reference to which we are in a good or bad state in relation to the passions. For example, if we feel anger intensely or weakly, we are in a bad condition, but if in a measured way, we are in a good condition, and similarly with the other passions as well. Neither the virtues nor the vices, then, are passions, because we are not said to be serious or base in reference to the passions, but in reference to the virtues and vices, and because we are neither praised nor blamed in reference to the passions simply, for neither he who is afraid nor he who is angry is praised, nor is he who is simply angry blamed, but only he who is such in a certain way. Rather, it is in reference to the virtues and vices that we are praised or blamed. Further, we are angry and afraid in the absence of choice, but the virtues are certain choices or not without choice. In addition to these considerations, in the case of the passions we are said to be moved, but in that of the virtues and vices we are not said to be moved, but rather to have a certain disposition. On account of these considerations as well, the virtues and vices are not capacities either. We are not said to be either good or bad by dint of possessing the capacity simply to undergo the passions, nor are we praised or blamed. Further, we are possessed by capacities by nature, but we do not by nature become good or bad, but we spoke about this before. If, then, the virtues are neither passions nor capacities, it remains that they are characteristics. What virtue is with respect to its genus, then, has been said. Chapter 6. Yet one ought to say not only this, that virtue is a characteristic, but also what sort of characteristic it is. So it must be stated that every virtue both brings that of which it is the virtue into a good condition, and causes the work belonging to that thing to be done well. For example, the virtue of the eye makes both the eye and its work excellent, for by means of the virtue of the eye we see well. Similarly, the virtue of a horse makes the horse both excellent and good when it comes to running, and carrying its rider, and standing its ground before enemies. If indeed this is so in all cases, then the virtue of a human being too would be that characteristics as a result of which a human being becomes good, and as a result of which he causes his own work to be done well. And how this will be, we have already stated. But virtue will be further manifest also as follows, if we contemplate what sort of thing its nature is. In everything continuous and divisible, it is possible to grasp the more, the less, and the equal, and these either in reference to the thing itself or in relation to us. The equal is also a certain middle term, between excess and deficiency. I mean by a middle term of the thing that which stands at an equal remove from each of the extremes, which is in fact one and the same thing for all. Though in relation to us, it is that which neither takes too much nor is deficient. But this is not one thing, nor is it the same for all. For example, if 10 is much, but 2 is few, 6 is a middle term for those who take it in reference to the thing itself. For it both exceeds and is exceeded by an equal amount, and this is the middle term according to the arithmetic proportion. But one ought not to grasp in this way the middle term relative to us. For if eating 10 pounds is a lot, but 2 pounds too little, the trainer will not prescribe 6 pounds, since perhaps even this is a lot or little for him who will take it. For Milo, it will be too little. For someone just starting gymnastic training, it will be too much. It is similar in the case of running and in that of wrestling. Thus every knower of the excess and the deficiency avoids them, but seeks out the middle term and chooses this, yet not a middle belonging to the thing in question, but rather the one relative to us. Indeed, every science in this way brings its work to a good conclusion, by looking to the middle term and guiding the works towards this. Hence people are accustomed to saying that there is nothing to take away from or add to works that are in a good state, or on the grounds that the good state is destroyed by excess and deficiency, but the mean preserves it, and the good craftsmen, as we say, perform the work by looking to this. Virtue is more precise and better than every art, as its nature as well. If all this is so, then virtue would be skillful in aiming at the middle term. But I mean moral virtue, for it is concerned with passions and actions, and it is in these the excess, deficiency, and the middle term reside. For example, it is possible to be afraid, to be confident, to desire, to be angry, to feel pity, and in general to feel pleasure and pain to a greater or lesser degree than one ought. In both cases this is not good. But to feel them when one ought, and at the things one ought, in relation to those people whom one ought, for the sake of what and as one ought, all these constitute the middle as well as what is best, which is in fact what belongs to virtue. Similarly, in the case of actions too, there is an excess, a deficiency, and the middle term. Virtue is concerned with passions and actions, in which the excess is in error and the deficiency is blamed. But the middle term is praised and guides one correctly, and both praise and correct guidance belong to virtue. Virtue, therefore, is a certain mean, since it at any rate is skillful in aiming at the middle term. Further, while it is possible to be in error in many ways, for what is bad is unlimited or indeterminate, as Pythagoreans used to conjecture what is good, limited or determinate. There is only one way to guide someone correctly, and thus the former is easy, the later hard. It is easy to miss the target, hard to hit it. On account of these considerations, then, to vice belongs the excess and the deficiency, to virtue the mean. For people are good in one way, but in all kinds of ways bad. Virtue, therefore, is a characteristic marked by choice, residing in the mean relative to us, a characteristic defined by reason and as the prudent person would define it. Virtue is also a mean with respect to two vices, the one vice related to excess, the other to deficiency, and further it is a mean because some vices fall short of and others exceed which should be the case in both passions and actions, whereas virtue discovers and chooses the middle term. Thus, with respect to its being and the definition that states what it is, virtue is a mean, but with respect to what is best and the doing of something well, it is an extreme. But not every action or every passion admits of the mean, for some have names that are immediately associated with baseness. For example, spitefulness, shamelessness, envy, and when it comes to actions, adultery, theft, and murder. For all these things, and those like them, are spoken of as being themselves base, rather than just their excesses or deficiencies. It is never possible, then, to be correct as regards them, for one is always in error, and it is not possible to do what concerns such things well or not well. By committing adultery with the woman one ought, and is one not. Rather, doing any of these things, whatever is simply in error. Similar to this, then, is thinking it right that, as regards committing injustice, being a coward, and acting licentiously, there is a mean, an excess, and a deficiency. In this way, there will be a mean of an excess and of a deficiency, an excess of an excess, and a deficiency of a deficiency. And just as there is no excess and deficiency of moderation and courage, on account of the middle terms being somehow an extreme, so too there would not be a mean or an excess and a deficiency of those base acts mentioned above. Rather, however they are done, they are in error. For in general, there is neither a mean of an excess and a deficiency, nor an excess and deficiency of a mean. Chapter 7. One must not only state this definition in general terms, but also make it harmonize with the particulars involved. For in the case of arguments concerning actions, the general arguments are of wider application, whereas those pertaining to a part are truer. Actions concern particulars, and it is with these that the arguments ought to accord. One must grasp these particulars from the following outline. Concerning fear and confidence, then, courage is a mean. Among those characterized by an excess, he who is excessive in fearlessness is nameless. In fact, many of these characteristics are nameless, and he who is excessive in feeling confident is reckless. He who is excessive in being afraid and deficient in feeling confident is a coward. Concerning pleasures and pains, not all of them are to a lesser degree as regards pains. The mean is moderation, the excess, licentiousness. But those who are deficient when it comes to pleasures do not arise very much, and thus people of this sort too have not attained a name. Let them be the insensible. Concerning the giving and taking of money, the mean is liberality, the excess and deficiency prodigality and stinginess, respectively, but they are excessive and deficient in contrary respects. The prodigal person is excessive in spending, but deficient in taking, whereas the stingy is excessive in taking, but deficient in spending. Now at present we are speaking in outline and similarly being satisfied with just that. But later what pertains to them will be defined more precisely. Concerning money, there are also other dispositions. The mean is magnificence, for the magnificent person differs from the liberal, the former being concerned with great things, the later with small. The excess is vulgarity and crassness, the deficiency parsimony. These differ from matters related to liberality, but how they differ will be stated later. Concerning honor and dishonor, the mean is greatness of soul, the excess, what is said to be a certain vanity, the deficiency smallness of soul. And just as we were saying that liberality bears a relation to magnificence, though it differs by being concerned with small things, so also there is a certain other virtue that bears a relation to greatness of soul, the later being concerned with great honor, the former with small. For it is possible to long for honor as one ought, and more or less than one ought. The person who is excessive in his longings in this regard is said to be ambitious, deficient, unambitious, while the one in the middle is nameless. And the dispositions are in fact nameless, except the ambition of the ambitious person. This is why people at the extremes lay claim to the middle ground, and we sometimes call the person in the middle ambitious, sometimes unambitious, and sometimes we praise the ambitious person, sometimes the unambitious one. What the cause is, on account of which we do this, will be stated subsequently. For now, let us speak about what remains in the manner that has guided us thus far. In what concerns anger, too, there is an excess, a deficiency, and a mean. And although these are pretty much nameless, let us call the mean gentleness, since we speak of the person in the middle as gentle. Of those at the extremes, let he who is excessive be irascible, the vice irascibility, and let he who is deficient be a sort of unirascible person, the deficiency, unirascibility. There are also three other means, and though they bear a certain similarity to one another, they also differ from one another. For all are concerned with our sharing in speeches and actions, but they differ because one of them is concerned with the truth in such speeches and actions, the others with what is pleasant in them. Of these later, one is found in times of play, the other in all that relates to life as a whole. One must speak about these two, then, so that we may see better that in all things the mean is praiseworthy, and the extremes are neither praiseworthy nor correct, but instead blameworthy. Now the majority of these are nameless, yet one must try, as in the case of the others as well, to fashion a name for them for the sake of clarity and ease of following along. Concerning the truth, then, let the person in the middle be said to be somebody truthful, and the mean, truthfulness. The pretense that exaggerates its boastfulness, and he who possesses it, a boaster, whereas that which understates is irony, and he who possesses it, an ironist. As for what is pleasant in times of play, he who is in the middle is witty, and the disposition wittiness. The excess is buffoonery, and he who possesses it, a buffoon, while he who is deficient is a sort of bore, and the characteristic boorishness. As for the remaining part of what is pleasant, which is found in life as a whole, he who is pleasant and as he ought to be is friendly, and the relevant mean friendliness. But he who is friendly in excess is ubiquitous, if he is such for no reason. But if he is excessively friendly for his own advantage, he is a flatterer. He who is deficient and is in all things unpleasant is a sort of quarrelsome and surly person. There are also means in the passions and concerning the passions. For a sense of shame is not a virtue, but he who is bashful is praised. In these things, too, there is one person said to be in the middle, another who is in excess, like the shy person who feels shame in everything. He who is deficient in this, or is generally ashamed of nothing, is shameless, whereas he who is in the middle is bashful. Indignation is a mean between envy and spitefulness, and these concern pleasure and pain at the fortunes that befall one's neighbors. The indignant person is pained at those who fare well undeservedly. The envious person exceeds him because he is pained by anyone's faring well. The spiteful is so deficient in feeling pain at the misfortune of others that he even delights in it. But about these types there will be an opportunity to speak elsewhere. As for justice, since it is not spoken of in a simple way, after we have gone through each of the meanings of justice, we will say how they are. Means is similarly also with the rational virtues. Alright, that's the end of chapter 7. Still have about 2 more chapters left in book 2. Gonna pick that up next time. So hit the like and subscribe button if you like this, and see you next time.